The gunshot that shattered the morning calm sent Olivia Harper diving behind the water trough, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, and in that instant, she knew everything she owned in this world was about to be taken from her if she didn't act fast. Dust kicked up around the general store where three masked men were already hauling merchandise into their saddlebags, their horses stamping and snorting in the chaos. Olivia pressed herself against the rough wood, her fingers digging into the splintered planks as she watched her neighbors scatter like tumbleweeds in a storm. This was the third raid on Lyndon, Kansas, in as many months, and each time the outlaws grew bolder, their appetites more voracious. The year was 1876, and lawlessness had sunk its teeth deep into this corner of the frontier where the railroad hadn't quite reached and the law barely bothered to visit. She thought of the small leather trunk in her rented room above the millinery shop, packed with everything that mattered. Her mother's silver locket, the deed to a plot of land in Colorado her father had won in a poker game before he died, the $300 she had saved from 2 years of sewing dresses and mending shirts, and the journal filled with her mother's recipes and her own careful observations about medicinal herbs. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was the sum total of her 22 years on this earth, and she would be damned if she let some band of thieves steal her future. The shooting stopped as quickly as it had begun, and the thunder of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Olivia emerged from her hiding spot, her legs shaking, her pale green dress covered in dirt. Around her, townspeople slowly crept from doorways and alleys, their faces drawn with fear and anger. Old Mr. Peterson was bleeding from a cut on his forehead where he had been pistol whipped, and Mrs. Chin stood weeping in front of her restaurant, the door hanging loose on its hinges. "They will be back," said Thomas Wright, the blacksmith, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "They always come back when they know a place won't fight." Olivia didn't wait to hear more. She gathered her skirts and ran toward the millinery shop, taking the stairs two at a time until she burst into her small room under the eaves. The trunk sat exactly where she had left it, untouched for now, but her hands were already moving, pulling it open, checking the contents. Everything was there, but the knowledge brought no comfort. The outlaws hadn't made it to the residential rooms this time, but next time they might. Next time they would tear through every building, every home, taking whatever they pleased. She couldn't trust the bank because Lyndon didn't have one, not a real one anyway, just old Mr. Hendricks, who kept people's money in a safe that looked like it could be opened with a butter knife. She couldn't carry everything with her constantly because that would draw attention, mark her as someone worth robbing. No, there was only one solution that made any sense, as mad as it seemed. She would bury it. The idea took root immediately, spreading through her mind like wildfire through dry grass. She would bury her belongings somewhere safe, somewhere only she knew, and she would leave them there until she was ready to leave this town for good. Maybe in a few months when she had saved more money, or maybe sooner if the raids continued. But at least her future would be protected, hidden in the earth where no outlaw could touch it. Olivia spent the rest of that day in a fever of planning. She couldn't bury her things too close to town because someone might see her, but she couldn't go too far either because she needed to be able to check on them occasionally. She thought about the landscape around Lyndon, the rolling prairie that stretched in every direction, marked here and there by scraggly cottonwoods and the occasional rocky outcropping. There was a place about 2 miles north, she remembered, where a lightning-struck oak tree stood alone on a small rise. She had ridden past it once when delivering a dress to a homesteader's wife. The tree was distinctive enough that she could find it again, but remote enough that no one would think to look there. That night, after the sun had set and the town had settled into an uneasy quiet, Olivia wrapped her belongings in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. She worked by candlelight, her fingers steady, despite the fear that still hummed through her veins. The locket went in first, the silver cool against her palm, then the deed, carefully folded, then the money in a small wooden box, and finally the journal. She tied the bundle with strong cord, then wrapped it again in canvas and more oilcloth, creating layers of protection. She waited until the darkest hours before dawn, when even the drunks had stumbled home and the saloon had gone quiet. She dressed in her oldest clothes, dark colors that would blend with the night, and she took a shovel from the shed behind the millinery shop, the metal cold and heavy in her hands. The bundle fit into a leather satchel that she slung across her body, and then she was moving through the shadows, keeping to the edges of buildings until she reached the outskirts of town. The prairie at night was a different world, full of sounds that made her jump and shadows that seemed to move with malicious intent. She forced herself to keep walking, following the north road by starlight, counting her steps to keep her mind occupied. The half moon gave just enough light to see by, and after what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, she saw the silhouette of the lightning struck oak rising against the sky. Up close, the tree was even more dramatic than she remembered. Lightning had split it nearly in half, leaving one side dead and bare, while the other still clung to life with a handful of twisted branches. The ground around it was rocky but not impossible to dig, and there was a slight depression on the eastern side where water might collect during rains. That would be the sophist earth. Olivia set down her satchel and gripped the shovel with both hands. The first strike into the earth sent a jolt up her arms, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. Dig, lift, toss. Dig, lift, toss. She fell into a rhythm, her muscles burning, sweat soaking through her clothes despite the cool night air. She had never done this kind of work before, not really, and her hands soon began to blister. But she couldn't stop, not now, not when she was so exposed out here in the open. The hole grew deeper, wide enough for the bundle, and then some. When she was satisfied it was deep enough, about 3 feet down, she unwrapped the satchel and carefully lowered her belongings into the earth. For a moment she just stood there, staring down at everything she owned in the world, feeling the weight of what she was doing. This was trust of a different kind, trusting the earth itself to keep her secrets, to hold her future safe until she was ready to claim it again. She filled in the hole, packing the dirt down firmly, then scattered rocks and dead leaves over the top to make it look undisturbed. She memorized every detail of the location, the shape of the tree, the angle of the branches, the cluster of white stones about 10 feet to the south, the way the land sloped gently down toward a dry creek bed to the west. She repeated it all in her mind like a prayer until she was certain she could find this spot again, even in a blizzard. The walk back to town seemed longer, her body exhausted, her hands throbbing. Dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern sky when she slipped back into her room, hid the shovel back in the shed, and collapsed onto her narrow bed. She had done it. Her belongings were safe, buried in the earth like treasure, like seeds waiting for spring. Now all she had to do was survive until she was ready to dig them up again and start her new life. She didn't expect the cowboy. Flynn Patterson rode into Lyndon 3 days later on a buckskin gelding that looked like it had covered a lot of miles. Olivia first saw him from the window of the millinery shop where she was hemming a skirt for the doctor's wife. He was tall. She could see that even from a distance, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. He wore the typical garb of a cattleman: dusty boots, worn denim pants, a shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to the color of a winter sky, and a hat that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he sat his horse, relaxed but alert, that caught her attention. "That's Flynn Patterson," said Mrs. Morrison, the milliner, peering over Olivia's shoulder. "I heard he was coming. His uncle owns the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles east. Young Flynn has been working cattle drives up north, but I guess he is taking over the ranch now that his uncle is getting too old for it." Olivia watched as Flynn dismounted in front of the general store, his movements easy and confident. He was probably around 27 or 28, she guessed. Old enough to have experience, but still young enough to have energy. Not that it mattered to her. She had no time for cowboys or ranchers or any man, really. Her plan was simple: save money, wait until it was safe, dig up her belongings, and head to Colorado, where she could claim her land and start a new life on her own terms. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The next raid came 5 days after Flynn Patterson arrived in town. This time the outlaws hit at noon, bold as brass, 6 men with bandanas covering their faces and guns in every hand. They shot out the windows of the general store, took what they wanted from the restaurant, and roughed up anyone who protested. Flynn was in the street when it happened, and Olivia watched from behind the millinery shop window as he drew his own pistol and fired at the retreating outlaws. He didn't hit anyone, but he didn't back down either, and that was more than most of the men in town could say. After the dust settled and the outlaws had vanished again, Flynn walked through the town, checking on people, helping Mrs. Chen pick up the scattered wreckage of her restaurant. He moved with a quiet competence that Olivia found herself noticing despite her better judgment. When he came to the millinery shop to make sure Mrs. Morrison was all right, Olivia kept her head down, focused on her sewing, but she felt his eyes on her anyway. "Everyone all right here?" His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas. "We are fine, thank you, Mr. Patterson," Mrs. Morrison said, fluttering around him like a nervous bird. "Just fine. So kind of you to check." Olivia glanced up briefly and found herself meeting his gaze. His eyes were brown, dark, and serious, and for a moment something passed between them. A spark of recognition, maybe, or just shared exhaustion with the constant threat hanging over the town. Then he nodded and moved on, and Olivia went back to her sewing, her hands perhaps not quite as steady as before. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her buried belongings, wondering if they were still safe, if the oilcloth was holding, if she had packed everything carefully enough. The urge to go check on them was overwhelming, but she forced herself to stay put. It was too dangerous to keep making trips out to that tree. Too likely someone would notice and follow her. She had to trust that everything would be fine, that the earth would keep her secrets. But 2 weeks later, when the summer rains came and didn't stop for 3 days straight, her worry grew into something close to panic. What if water had seeped into the hole? What if her mother's journal was ruined, the ink running, the recipes lost forever? What if the deed had dissolved into illegible pulp? On the fourth day, when the rain finally stopped and the sun came out, she knew she had to go check. She couldn't live with the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. She waited until her half-day off, telling Mrs. Morrison she was going for a walk to stretch her legs after being cooped up during the rain. It was the truth, more or less, just not the whole truth. She wore her walking boots and carried a small bag with some bread and cheese in case anyone asked, trying to look like a young woman out for a pleasant afternoon stroll and nothing more. The prairie was transformed by the rain, green shoots pushing up through the earth, wildflowers blooming in patches of purple and yellow. The air smelled clean and fresh, and if Olivia hadn't been so worried about her belongings, she might have enjoyed the walk. The north road had turned to mud in places, and she had to pick her way carefully to keep from ruining her boots. When she reached the lightning-struck oak, her heart sank. Water had pooled around the base of the tree, and the depression where she had buried her things was now a muddy puddle. She stood there for a moment, fighting the urge to cry, then forced herself to think practically. She needed to dig it up, check the damage, and either rebury it somewhere better or find another solution entirely. But she hadn't brought a shovel. The realization hit her like a slap. She had been so focused on getting out here, on checking on her things, that she hadn't thought through the practical details. She couldn't exactly carry a shovel through town in the middle of the day without drawing attention. She looked around desperately, hoping to find a stick or a flat rock she could use to dig, but everything was soaked and muddy and utterly useless. Looking for something? Olivia spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Flynn Patterson sat on his buckskin horse about 20 yards away, one hand resting on the pommel of his saddle, his expression curious but not unfriendly. Her mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation for why she was standing alone at a lightning-struck tree in the middle of nowhere, but her tongue felt thick and useless. Flynn dismounted, his boots squelching in the mud, and walked toward her with that same easy confidence she had noticed before. "I was checking the fence line for the triple bar when I saw you walking out this way. Seemed a bit far from town for a stroll." Olivia lifted her chin, trying to muster some dignity. "I needed air, fresh air. After the rain. Fresh air." He nodded slowly, his eyes moving from her face to the muddy puddle at the base of the tree and back again. Right. And you needed it at this particular tree? She could have lied more, could have spun some elaborate story, but she was tired of being afraid, tired of holding everything inside. And there was something about Flynn Patterson, standing there in his muddy boots with rain stains on his hat, that made her think maybe, just maybe, he might understand. I buried something here, she said quietly. My belongings, everything I own. I buried them to keep them safe from the raids, and now I am worried the rain got to them. But I didn't bring a shovel because I couldn't carry one through town without everyone asking questions. Flynn was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then he said, What kind of belongings? Important ones. My mother's locket, a land deed, money I have been saving, a journal. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the physical isolation. I know it sounds foolish, but I didn't know what else to do. The raiders keep coming, and there is no safe place in town, and I just needed to know my future was protected. It doesn't sound foolish, Flynn said, and his voice was gentle. Sounds like you were thinking smart. Desperate times call for creative solutions. He glanced at the puddle again, then back at her. I have a shovel on my horse, part of the repair kit. I can help you dig it up, see if there is damage. Olivia blinked, surprised by the offer. You would do that? But you don't even know me. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to bury your belongings in the middle of the prairie to keep them safe. I know you work at the millinery shop and you don't cause trouble. And I know what it is like to lose everything and have to start over. He walked back to his horse and untied a compact folding shovel from his saddlebag. Come on, let's see what we are dealing with. They worked together, Flynn doing most of the actual digging while Olivia crouched nearby, her hands clenched together. The mud made everything harder, but Flynn was strong and methodical, and within 20 minutes, he had cleared away the dirt and water to reveal the bundle still wrapped in its layers of oilcloth and canvas. Olivia reached for it with trembling hands, lifting it from the hole and setting it on a relatively dry patch of ground. She unwrapped the outer layers carefully, her breath caught in her throat, and then the inner layers, until finally she could see the wooden box and the journal and the locket, all of it miraculously dry. It is all right, she whispered, almost unable to believe it. It is all still dry. Flynn crouched beside her, examining the wrapping. You did a good job protecting it. Multiple layers tied tight. Smart thinking. Olivia looked up at him, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and helped her without asking for anything in return, and something shifted in her chest. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. No payment needed. Flynn stood and wiped his muddy hands on his pants. But you might want to think about moving it to a better spot. This depression is going to fill with water every time it rains. You want higher ground, somewhere with good drainage. I don't know the area well enough to find a better spot, Olivia admitted. I have only been in Lyndon for 2 years, and I haven't explored much beyond the town. Flynn thought for a moment, then said, There is a place on the Triple Bar, up on a ridge with a view of the whole valley. Dry as a bone even in heavy rain. If you want, I can take your belongings and bury them there for you. I promise on my honor they will be safe. Olivia hesitated. Trusting him to dig up her things was one thing. Trusting him to take them away and bury them somewhere she didn't know was something else entirely. But as she looked at his earnest face, at the way he had helped without hesitation, she found herself wanting to believe him. I need to know where, she said finally. I need to be able to check on them if I want. Fair enough. I can draw you a map, or better yet, I can show you the spot right now if you have time. He glanced at the sun, which was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. We would be back before dark. It was risky, riding off with a man she barely knew, but somehow Olivia felt safer with Flynn Patterson than she had felt in months. She nodded. All right, show me. Flynn helped her rewrap the bundle, making sure all the layers were secure, then tied it carefully to his saddle. He mounted the buckskin, then reached down to help Olivia up. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, his grip strong and warm, and then she was seated behind him, her arms around his waist for balance as they set off across the prairie. Riding with Flynn was different from riding alone or in a wagon. She could feel the strength of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body through his shirt. The buckskin had an easy gait, and after a few minutes, Olivia relaxed into the movement, letting herself enjoy the sensation of speed and freedom. The Triple Bar Ranch sprawled across a wide valley, with grazing cattle dotting the landscape and a creek running through the middle. Flynn guided the horse toward the eastern edge of the property, where the land rose into a series of rocky ridges. They climbed steadily, and when they reached the top, Olivia caught her breath at the view. She could see for miles in every direction, the town of Lyndon to the west, the prairie rolling away to the north and south, and to the east, more ridges fading into blue distance. "This is it," Flynn said, dismounting and helping Olivia down. "See that flat rock over there? Ground underneath is solid and dry. Perfect place to keep something safe." Olivia walked to the spot he indicated, examining it carefully. He was right, the drainage was excellent here, and the rock was distinctive enough that she could find it again. "It is perfect." They buried the bundle together this time, working side by side, and when they were done, Flynn used smaller rocks to mark the spot in a pattern that looked natural but would be recognizable to someone who knew what to look for. Then he drew a rough map on a piece of paper from his saddlebag, showing the landmarks and the path from town. "There," he said, handing her the map. "Now you can find it whenever you need to." Olivia folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her dress pocket. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Patterson. You have been incredibly kind." "Flynn," he said. "Just Flynn. And you don't need to thank me. Truth is, it is nice to help someone after feeling pretty useless during those raids." He looked out over the valley, his expression thoughtful. "I have been thinking about organizing the ranchers and the townspeople, putting together a real defense instead of just hiding and hoping the outlaws move on. But that is a conversation for another day." They rode back to town in comfortable silence, arriving just as the sun touched the horizon. Flynn let Olivia off at the edge of town so no one would see them together and start gossiping. But before she walked away, he said, "If you ever need help checking on your things, or if you need anything at all, you can find me at the Triple Bar. Just ask anyone." "Thank you, Flynn," Olivia said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "You have given me something I haven't had in a long time: peace of mind." Over the following weeks, Olivia found herself thinking about Flynn more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was just gratitude, nothing more, but the truth was harder to ignore. She liked the way he had listened to her without judgment, the way he had helped without expecting anything in return, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which wasn't often enough. She liked the quiet strength in him, the sense that he was someone who could be relied upon when everything else fell apart. She saw him occasionally in town, and they would exchange pleasantries, careful conversations that stayed on the surface because there were always people around, always eyes watching. But there was something unspoken between them now, a connection forged in mud and trust, and Olivia felt it growing stronger every time their paths crossed. Then came the day when Flynn made good on his idea to organize a defense. He called a meeting at the church, and Olivia attended along with most of the town. Flynn stood at the front, his hat in his hands, and laid out his plan. He wanted to form a volunteer militia, men who would train to defend the town, and he wanted to set up a warning system so that when the outlaws were spotted approaching, everyone would have time to prepare. "I know most of us came out here to get away from fighting," Flynn said, his voice carrying through the room. "But sometimes you have to stand up for what is yours. These outlaws think we are easy targets, and they will keep coming back until we prove them wrong. I am not saying we should go looking for trouble, but I am saying we should be ready when trouble comes looking for us." There was murmuring among the crowd, some agreement, some dissent. Old Mr. Peterson stood and said he was too old to fight, but he could keep watch. The blacksmith, Thomas Wright, said he was in, and so did several of the ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Even Dr. Mitchell, who had always preached patience and nonviolence, reluctantly agreed that some kind of defense was necessary. Olivia watched Flynn as he answered questions and addressed concerns, and she felt a swell of admiration. He wasn't doing this for glory or recognition. He was doing it because it needed to be done, because someone had to step up, and he was willing to be that someone. After the meeting, as people filtered out of the church, Olivia found herself standing near Flynn, waiting for a moment when they could talk without being overheard. When it finally came, she said quietly, "That was brave what you did in there." Flynn shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "We will see if it makes any difference. Talk is easy. Action is harder." "You will make it work," Olivia said, with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "You are that kind of person." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "How do you know? You barely know me." "I know enough," she said, echoing his words from that day at the lightning-struck oak. "I know you helped me when you didn't have to. I know you are trying to protect people who can't protect themselves. That tells me everything I need to know." Flynn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Would you walk with me, just for a bit?" They walked through the town as the evening settled in, the streets quiet, the sky above them turning shades of orange and purple. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was comfortable, easy in a way that made Olivia realize how rare this was, finding someone you didn't have to perform for, someone who accepted you as you were. When they reached the millinery shop, Flynn stopped and turned to face her. "Olivia, I need to say something, and I am not sure how to say it except straight out. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the day I helped you dig up your belongings. I know we don't know each other well, and I know you have your own plans for the future, but I would like to spend more time with you, get to know you better, if that is something you would want too." Olivia's breath caught. She had thought about this moment, imagined it in the quiet hours before sleep, but hearing the words out loud was different. "Flynn, She paused, trying to gather her thoughts. "I do want that. I have been thinking about you too. But I need you to understand that I am planning to leave Lyndon eventually. I have land in Colorado, and I want to claim it, start my own life there. I am not looking to settle down here." "Colorado," Flynn said, nodding slowly. "That is a long way. But a lot can happen between now and when you are ready to leave. Maybe we just take this one day at a time, see where it goes. No promises, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." It sounded simple when he put it that way, but Olivia knew it was anything but. Feelings were complicated, messy, unpredictable. Still, the thought of pushing him away, of closing this door before she even knew what was on the other side, felt wrong in a way she couldn't ignore. "One day at a time," she agreed. "I think I can do that." Flynn's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed him completely. "Good. That is real good. How about Sunday? There is a church social after service. We could sit together, let people see we are courting properly." "Courting," Olivia repeated, testing the word. It felt strange and thrilling all at once. "All right. Sunday." The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and careful courtship. Flynn came to town every Sunday, and they would sit together at the church social, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 15 and having to make his own way. He told her about the years he had spent working cattle drives, moving herds from Texas up to Kansas and beyond, sleeping under the stars and eating dust. He told her about his uncle offering him the triple bar, a chance to put down roots, to build something lasting. Olivia told him about her own past, about growing up in Missouri with a mother who knew every herb and remedy, a father who gambled and drank, but loved his family in his own broken way. She told him about her mother dying when she was 18, about her father winning that land in Colorado 2 years later, and then dying himself before he could claim it, leaving Olivia with nothing but a deed and a trunk full of memories. She told him about coming to Lyndon because it was on the way to Colorado, and she had needed to stop and earn money for the journey, about getting stuck here working at the millinery because every time she saved enough to leave, something happened to drain her funds again. You will get there, Flynn said, his hand warm on hers, as they sat on a bench outside the church. Colorado, you will claim that land and build your life. I believe that. And you will make the Triple Bar the best ranch in Kansas, Olivia said, squeezing his fingers. You will defend this town and make it safe. I believe that too. But believing and doing were different things, and the reality of the situation crashed back into their lives 3 weeks after they started courting. The outlaws returned, this time with 8 men instead of 6, and they came at dawn when most people were still sleeping. But Flynn's warning system worked. The lookout spotted them riding in from the south and rang the church bell in the pattern Flynn had established, 3 long rings followed by 3 short. Olivia woke to the sound of that bell and knew immediately what it meant. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking, and grabbed the small pistol she had bought after the last raid. She wasn't much of a shot, but she could at least defend herself if it came to that. Downstairs, Mrs. Morrison was already barricading the door, her face pale but determined. The sound of gunfire erupted in the street, but this time it wasn't one-sided. Flynn and his volunteer militia were ready, positioned at key points around town with rifles and pistols. The outlaws charged in expecting easy pickings and instead found themselves in a fight. The battle lasted less than 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Olivia huddled behind the barricaded door with Mrs. Morrison, listening to the shots and shouts, praying that Flynn was safe, that everyone was safe. When the gunfire finally stopped, there was a long moment of terrible silence. Then cheering erupted, and Olivia knew the outlaws had been driven off. She and Mrs. Morrison ventured outside carefully, and what they saw made Olivia's heart swell with a complicated mix of relief and pride. 3 outlaws lay dead in the street, and 2 more were wounded and being tied up by Thomas Wright and his sons. The rest had fled, and the townspeople were celebrating, clapping Flynn on the back, shaking his hand. Flynn caught sight of Olivia, and his expression shifted from grim satisfaction to something softer. He made his way through the crowd to her, and before she could think about propriety or what people would say, she threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "You are all right?" she breathed against his chest. "Thank God you are all right." Flynn's arms came around her, strong and sure. "I am fine, we all are. A few scrapes, but nothing serious. They won't be coming back anytime soon." Olivia pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Flynn corrected. "All of us together. That is how it has to be out here. People looking out for each other." In the aftermath of the battle, something shifted in Lyndon. The town felt safer, more united, and people walked with their heads higher. Flynn became a local hero, though he tried to shrug off the attention, insisting he had just done what needed doing. But Olivia saw how people looked at him now, with respect and gratitude, and she felt proud to be courting him. Their relationship deepened through the summer and into the fall. They spent every Sunday together, and Flynn started coming to town in the evenings during the week as well, timing his visits to when Olivia finished work. They would walk together, sometimes out to the edge of town where they could see the prairie stretching away forever, sometimes just up and down the main street, talking and laughing and learning each other's rhythms. Olivia found herself falling for him in ways that terrified and thrilled her. She loved his quiet strength, his sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable, the way he listened to her like her words mattered. She loved his hands, rough from work but gentle when he touched her. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. But she also felt the weight of her plans pressing on her. She still wanted to go to Colorado, still wanted to claim her land and build her own life. She had been independent for so long, had fought so hard to maintain control over her own future, and the thought of giving that up, even for Flynn, felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. One evening in late September, they rode out to the Triple Bar together, and Flynn showed her around the ranch properly for the first time. The main house was solid and well built, with a wide porch and a view of the valley. The barn was large and well maintained, the corrals sturdy, the cattle healthy and numerous. It was clear Flynn had been working hard to improve the place since taking it over from his uncle, who had retired to a small house on the edge of the property. "This is all yours?" Olivia asked, standing on the porch and looking out at the spread of land. "Mostly," Flynn said, leaning against the railing beside her. "Uncle Henry still owns it on paper, but he signed it over to me to manage. When he passes, it will be mine outright. It is not huge compared to some of the ranches in Texas, but it is good land, and there is room to grow." Olivia could hear the pride in his voice, and she understood it. This was his dream, the same way Colorado was hers. "You have done well with it. Anyone can see that." Flynn was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I keep thinking about the future, about what comes next. And every time I do, you are in those thoughts, Olivia. I know you have your plans, and I respect that. But I need to know, is there any world where those plans could include me?" Olivia's throat tightened. This was the conversation she had been avoiding, the one that forced her to confront the impossible choice forming in her heart. "Flynn, I don't know. I care about you, more than I have ever cared about anyone, but I am not ready to give up on Colorado. That land is all I have left of my father, and it represents a chance to be truly independent, to build something that is mine." "What if we built something together?" Flynn asked, turning to face her. "Not here, not in Colorado, but somewhere in between. Somewhere we both choose, because we want to be together, not because we are giving up our dreams." "Where would that even be?" Olivia asked, feeling tears prick her eyes. "How would that work?" "I don't know yet," Flynn admitted. "But I know I don't want to lose you, and I know you don't want to lose your independence. So maybe we figure out a way to have both. People do it, Olivia. Men and women who love each other, who build lives together, where they both have a say. Where they both matter equally." The word love hung in the air between them, bright and dangerous. Flynn reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I love you, Olivia Harper. I know it is fast. I know we have only been courting a few months, but I love you. And if you need time to figure out your feelings, I can give you that. If you need to go to Colorado and see that land and decide what you really want, I will support that. But I am asking you to consider that maybe what you want and what I want don't have to be mutually exclusive." Olivia looked down at their joined hands, feeling the tears spill over. "I love you too," she whispered. "That is what makes this so hard. I never planned on falling in love. I never planned on wanting to stay." "Then don't stay," Flynn said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "Don't give up your dreams for me, but don't run away from this either. We can figure it out together, whatever it looks like." They stood there on the porch as the sun set, holding each other, and Olivia felt something inside her shift and settle. Maybe it didn't have to be all or nothing. Maybe there was a middle path, one she couldn't see yet, but that would reveal itself if she was brave enough to look. As autumn deepened and winter approached, Olivia and Flynn continued their courtship, but now with a new sense of urgency. They talked seriously about the future, about possibilities and compromises. Flynn suggested they could sell the Triple Bar and use the money to buy land in Colorado, start fresh together. Olivia refused, saying she wouldn't let him give up his ranch for her. She suggested she could give up the Colorado land, sell the deed, and stay in Kansas with him. Flynn refused that too, saying he wouldn't be the reason she abandoned her dreams. They went round and round, neither willing to let the other sacrifice too much, until finally In early November, Flynn came to her with a new idea. What if we kept both? He said. They were sitting in the parlor of the millinery shop, Mrs. Morrison having given them privacy for once. I have been doing research, writing letters. Colorado is cattle country too, Olivia. What if we went there together, looked at your land, and figured out if we could build a ranch on it? If we could, I could sell the triple bar to Thomas Wright. He has been wanting to expand. Then we would have money to get started in Colorado, and you would get your land, and I would get to ranch in new territory. We would both get what we want. Olivia stared at him, her mind racing. You would really do that? Leave Kansas? Leave the triple bar? For you? Yes, Flynn said simply. The triple bar is just land, Olivia. You are what matters. We can build a ranch anywhere. But I can't build a life with anyone but you. Something broke open inside Olivia, some last wall of resistance she had been clinging to. All right, she said, and her voice was shaking. Let's do it. Let's go to Colorado together. See the land. If it is good for ranching, we will make it work. If it is not, we will figure out something else. But we do it together. Flynn's face lit up, and he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time, giddy with relief and excitement and the sheer terror of taking such a leap. They made plans immediately. They would wait until spring when the weather was better for travel, and in the meantime, Flynn would work on selling the triple bar, and Olivia would finish her commitments at the millinery shop. They would get married before they left, a simple ceremony in the church with the whole town invited. And they would dig up Olivia's buried belongings together, those precious items that represented her past and would now be part of their shared future. The winter passed in a flurry of preparations. Flynn found a buyer for the triple bar, Thomas Wright and his sons, who pooled their money and offered a fair price. Olivia gave Mrs. Morrison notice, and the older woman, though sad to lose her best seamstress, was happy for Olivia. The whole town buzzed with excitement about the wedding, and despite the hardships everyone faced, people rallied to make it special. On a cold but clear day in February 1877, Flynn Patterson and Olivia Harper stood before Reverend Matthews in the little church and pledged their lives to each other. Olivia wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue with white lace, and Flynn wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed for once, his face clean-shaven. When he looked at her as they said their vows, Olivia saw her whole future reflected in his eyes, full of possibility and love. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the church, modest but joyful. People brought food and drink, and there was even music, old Mr. Peterson playing his fiddle while couples danced. Olivia danced with Flynn, his arms strong around her, and she felt like she was floating, like all the fear and uncertainty of the past years had finally lifted. That night, they stayed at the ranch house at the Triple Bar, their last night there before the new owners took possession. Flynn carried Olivia over the threshold, and she laughed, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. They had already packed most of their belongings into the wagon they would take to Colorado, but they had left out blankets and basic supplies for one last night. They made love for the first time in the bedroom Flynn had used since coming to Kansas, and it was everything Olivia had hoped for, tender and passionate, and a little awkward but perfect in its imperfection. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, talking in whispers about their dreams for the future. Do you think the land will be good? Olivia asked, tracing patterns on Flynn's chest with her fingertips. I think it will be exactly what we need it to be, Flynn said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. And if it is not, we will make it work anyway. That is what marriage is, right? Figuring things out together. I am scared, Olivia admitted. But I am excited too. Is that normal? I think that is exactly normal, Flynn said, chuckling. I am terrified, but I am also the happiest I have ever been. You do that to me, Olivia. You make me feel like I can do anything. We can do anything, Olivia corrected. Together. 2 days later, they set out for Colorado, their wagon loaded with supplies and the belongings they had carefully excavated from the ridge on the Triple Bar. Flynn had insisted they dig them up together the day before they left, and Olivia had stood beside him as he shoveled, her heart in her throat, until the bundle emerged from the earth, still intact, still dry, still safe. She had unwrapped it carefully, checking each item. The locket gleamed in the sunlight, and she fastened it around her neck, feeling the weight of her mother's memory settle against her skin. The deed was in perfect condition, and Flynn had examined it carefully, nodding with satisfaction at the description of the property. The money was all there, and they added it to their traveling funds. And the journal, her mother's precious journal with all its recipes and remedies, was pristine, every page intact. "Thank you," Olivia had said to Flynn, kissing him softly, "for helping me dig them up. For everything. Always," Flynn had promised. "That is what I am here for." The journey to Colorado took nearly 3 weeks. They traveled in the wagon, camping at night under the stars, and despite the hardships of the road, Olivia found herself enjoying the adventure. Flynn was a skilled traveler, always finding the best spots to camp, always making sure they had enough supplies. They talked for hours as the wagon rolled along, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other in ways they hadn't been able to before. When they finally crossed into Colorado territory and began making their way toward the plot of land described in the deed, Olivia felt a mixture of excitement and dread. What if the land was terrible? What if it was rocky and barren, unsuitable for ranching? What if this whole journey had been for nothing? But when they crested a hill and saw the valley spread out before them, Olivia's fears evaporated. The land was beautiful, a wide valley with a river running through it, surrounded by low mountains. There were meadows that would be perfect for grazing, stands of timber for building, and the soil, when Flynn dismounted to examine it, was rich and dark. "This is it?" Flynn asked, consulting the deed and the landmarks described in it. "This is your land?" "Our land," Olivia corrected, her voice thick with emotion. "Our land, Flynn." They spent the next several days exploring every inch of the property, making plans for where to build the house, where to put the barn, how to manage the water rights from the river. It was more land than Olivia had imagined, a full 160 acres, and it was perfect for ranching. Flynn was practically vibrating with excitement, already talking about how many head of cattle they could support, where to put fencing, how to protect the herd from predators. They filed the deed properly at the land office in the nearest town, a growing settlement called Greenfield about 10 miles west. The clerk congratulated them on their purchase, and Olivia had to explain it wasn't a purchase, it had been won by her father in a card game years ago. The clerk shrugged and stamped the papers, making Flynn and Olivia Patterson the legal owners of the land. Over the following months, they worked harder than Olivia had ever worked in her life. They built a small cabin first, just one room with a loft, but solid and tight against the weather. Flynn cut and hauled timber from the mountains while Olivia chinked the gaps with mud and moss. They built a barn next, smaller than the one at the Triple Bar, but functional. They bought a few head of cattle with the money from selling the ranch, and they spent their days caring for the animals, expanding their homestead, and dreaming about the future. It was exhausting, backbreaking work, but Olivia had never been happier. She loved waking up next to Flynn, loved working beside him, loved seeing the ranch take shape around them. She planted a garden using the knowledge from her mother's journal, and she gathered herbs from the meadows to make remedies, building a small business selling them to folks in Greenfield. Flynn proved himself to be as skilled a rancher as she had believed, and their small herd grew healthy and strong under his care. Their first winter in Colorado was hard. The snows came heavy and early, and there were days when they were snowed in, when they had to huddle together for warmth and ration their supplies carefully. But they survived, and when spring came, it felt like a miracle, like a promise that they had made it through the worst, and everything from here would be easier. By their second year on the land, the ranch was thriving. They had expanded their herd, built a proper house with multiple rooms, and even hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Olivia's herb business had grown as well, and she had become known in Greenfield as someone you went to when you needed healing that doctors couldn't provide. And then, in the spring of their second year, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Flynn one evening as they sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sun set over the mountains. He stared at her for a moment, processing the news, and then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Olivia confirmed, placing his hand on her still flat belly. "Are you ready for this?" "Ready? I have been ready since the day I met you," Flynn said, kissing her tenderly. "We are going to be the best parents. Our child is going to grow up loved and safe and free, with all the opportunities we never had." Their son, whom they named Henry, after Flynn's uncle, was born in November during the first snowfall of the season. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Olivia feared she wouldn't survive it. But Flynn stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, and when their son finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Olivia wept with relief and joy. Flynn held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Olivia knew in that moment that every choice she had made, every risk she had taken, had led her exactly where she was supposed to be. As Henry grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They had built something real and lasting, a home and a business that would support their family for generations. Olivia often thought back to those desperate days in Lyndon when she had buried her belongings in the earth, terrified of losing everything. She thought about how Flynn had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray, how he had helped her dig up those belongings and in doing so had helped her unearth a future she had never imagined. When Henry was 2 years old, Olivia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara after Olivia's mother. And 3 years after that, another son, James, completed their family. The house was always full of noise and laughter, children running through the rooms, ranch hands coming and going, neighbors stopping by for herbs or advice or just company. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Olivia back to the ridge where they had first buried her belongings on the Triple Bar land. They had made a trip back to Kansas to visit old friends, and Flynn had insisted on this detour. They stood together looking out over the valley, the land now owned by the Wright family and thriving under their care. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Flynn asked, his arm around Olivia's waist. "Which day? The day you helped me dig them up the first time?" "No, the day we dug them up together before we left for Colorado. You thanked me for everything." Olivia smiled, leaning into his warmth. "I remember. I should have told you then, but I was too overwhelmed to get the words out. You don't need to thank me, Olivia. Helping you that day, helping you dig up those belongings, that was the best decision I ever made. Because it gave me you. It gave me us. Everything good in my life started the moment I decided to help a brave woman who was trying to protect her future." Olivia turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her whole world. "We protected it together. That is what marriage is. Protecting each other's dreams and building new ones together." "And we have," Flynn said, kissing her softly. "We have built something beautiful. A home, a family, a life. I wouldn't change a single thing." "Neither would I," Olivia whispered against his lips. "Neither would I." They returned to Colorado, to their ranch and their children, to the life they had carved out of the wild frontier through hard work and love and unwavering faith in each other. The land that Olivia's father had won in a card game and that she had nearly lost to fear became the foundation of a legacy that would last for generations. Years later, when Olivia was an old woman with silver hair and laugh lines etched deep into her face, she would sit on the porch of the ranch house and watch her grandchildren play in the yard. Flynn would be beside her, his hand warm in hers, and they would remember those early days, the struggle and the fear and the incredible courage it took to trust each other with their dreams. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Olivia would take out her mother's journal. The pages now yellowed, but still intact, and she would add her own entries. She would write about the herbs she had discovered, the remedies that worked, the births she had attended, and the people she had helped. But she would also write about love, about partnership, about what it meant to build a life with someone who saw you not as incomplete without them, but as whole, and choosing to share that wholeness. She would write about the day she buried her belongings to keep them safe, and about the cowboy who helped her dig them up again, not knowing that in doing so, he would help her uncover something far more valuable than silver lockets or land deeds or carefully saved money. He had helped her discover the future she was meant to have, the love she was meant to find, and the home she was meant to build. And that, Olivia would write in her careful hand, was the greatest treasure of all. The ranch, which they had named the Harper Patterson Ranch to honor both their families, grew into one of the most successful operations in that part of Colorado. Flynn's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread, and Olivia's healing work became so well known that people traveled from miles around to seek her help. Together, they created not just a business, but a community hub, a place where people felt welcome and safe. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Henry inherited his father's skill with cattle and his mother's compassionate heart, eventually taking over the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Clara became a teacher, opening a school in Greenfield and educating children whose parents could never have afforded formal education otherwise. James, the youngest, inherited his grandmother's gift for healing and studied to become a proper doctor, though he always credited his mother's journal and teaching as the foundation of his knowledge. As Olivia and Flynn aged, they never lost the closeness they had forged in those early years. They still took walks together in the evenings, still sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, still held hands like newlyweds. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, the loss of loved ones, and the challenges of raising children on the frontier. They had celebrated births and weddings, mourned deaths and setbacks, and through it all, they had remained partners in every sense of the word. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration that brought together people from all over the territory. The house and yard were filled with friends and neighbors, people whose lives had been touched by Flynn and Olivia in countless ways. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, and through it all, Flynn kept Olivia close, his arm around her waist, his eyes never straying far from her face. 50 years, he said softly as they danced slowly to music played by their grandson on a fiddle. 50 years, and it still feels like not enough time with you. We have been blessed, Olivia said, her head resting against his shoulder. More blessed than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever think about those early days? About burying your belongings in the earth? All the time, Olivia admitted. I think about how scared I was, how alone I felt. And then I think about you appearing on that horse, offering to help a stranger for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. You changed my life that day, Flynn Patterson. We changed each other's lives, Flynn corrected gently. That is what love does. It transforms us, makes us better than we were before. Olivia looked up at him, this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for 50 years, and she saw in his eyes the same love that had been there from the beginning, only deepened and enriched by time and experience. I would do it all again, she said. Every hard moment, every challenge, every fear. I would do it all again to end up right here, right now, with you. So would I, Flynn said, and he kissed her there in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by the family and community they had built together, sealing a promise that had been made 50 years ago and had been kept faithfully every day since. When Flynn passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, Olivia grieved deeply but without regret. They had lived a full life together, had built something that would outlast them both, had loved each other completely and without reservation. She buried him on the ranch, on the highest point of their land, where he had always said he could see forever, and she planted wildflowers on his grave that bloomed every spring in a riot of color. Olivia lived another 5 years after Flynn's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still tending her herb garden, still writing in her journal, still telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. And when her time finally came, she went peacefully, holding the silver locket her mother had given her, wearing the wedding ring Flynn had placed on her finger 55 years earlier. They buried her next to Flynn on that high ridge, and at her funeral, Henry read from her journal passages about love and courage and the importance of protecting not just your belongings, but your dreams. He read about the day she had buried everything precious in the earth and about the cowboy who had helped her dig it all up again, understanding that sometimes the most valuable things we bury are the fears that hold us back from living fully. The Harper Patterson Ranch continued to thrive for generations, and the story of Flynn and Olivia became a family legend, passed down from parents to children to grandchildren. They spoke of the woman who had been brave enough to bury her belongings to keep them safe, and the cowboy who had been kind enough to help her dig them up again, and how that simple act of compassion had sparked a love that built an empire and created a legacy that would last forever. In the town of Greenfield, now a proper city, there stands a historical marker on the site of Olivia's first herb shop. It tells the story of a healer who came from Kansas and built a life in Colorado, who raised 3 children and countless cattle, who helped deliver dozens of babies and saved countless lives with her remedies. But locals know the real story is not just about healing or ranching or frontier survival. The real story is about love, about 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And somewhere on a high ridge on what is still the Harper Patterson Ranch, wildflowers bloom every spring over 2 graves marked with simple stones. The inscriptions are worn now, faded by more than a century of wind and weather, but you can still make out the names. Flynn Patterson, beloved husband and father, and Olivia Harper Patterson, beloved wife and mother. And beneath those names, added by their children, a simple epitaph that tells the whole story in just a few words. Together, they built a dream. Because that is what they did, Flynn and Olivia, the cowboy and the seamstress, who met because of buried belongings and fear, who fell in love over dirt and trust, who built a life on faith and hard work, and the unwavering belief that love, real love, was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap into the unknown. Their story became part of the fabric of the land itself, woven into the history of Colorado and the West, a reminder that the most valuable things we own are not the belongings we can bury in the earth, but the connections we make with other people, the love we give and receive, and the courage to trust someone else with our dreams and let them help us dig up the future we are meant to have. And though Flynn and Olivia have been gone for more than 100 years now, their great-great-grandchildren still work the land they claimed, still live in houses built on the foundation they laid, still tell the story of how it all began with a woman desperate to protect her future and a man kind enough to help, and how that moment of connection changed everything. The ranch house, expanded and modernized, but still standing on its original foundation, contains a small museum room where family treasures are displayed. The silver locket is there, carefully preserved in a glass case. The deed to the original land, yellowed and fragile but still legible, hangs framed on the wall. The journal, Olivia's precious journal with her mother's recipes and her own careful additions, rests in a climate-controlled case, open to a page where Olivia wrote about the day Flynn helped her dig up her belongings for the first time, her handwriting steady and full of hope. Visitors to the ranch can see these artifacts and read the stories, can walk the land that Flynn and Olivia claimed and built upon, can stand on the ridge where they are buried, and look out over the valley that became their legacy. And if they listen carefully, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, some say you can almost hear laughter, the sound of two people who found each other and held on tight, who faced every challenge together, and who proved that love, when it is real and true and brave, can indeed conquer all. That is the story of Flynn Patterson and Olivia Harper, the cowboy and the woman who buried her belongings, and how helping her dig them up became the beginning of a love story for the ages, a partnership that built an empire, and a legacy that reminds us all that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in what we bury, but in who helps us uncover them again.